Hey, good morning. It is November 19th. It is 9 o'clock. I am preparing for an interview with Chuck Greaves, also known as C. Joseph Greaves. Can you see that? C. Joseph Greaves when he writes literary fiction. He's written a book about Lucky Luciano and those days back then. It's a fictional retelling of sort of what happened. So I thought it would be interesting to walk you through what I do to from beginning to end to prep for an interview. Not only prep for an interview, but to actually do the interview and then produce the interview and post the interview. And I'm not going to do this in real time. It'll be sped up so that it's not horrifically boring, because this does take some time. But I'll put, if I can, I'll put some kind of a time clock in there. I start out by filling out this prep sheet. I don't think you can see it here, but basically it's the intro. I fill out the author's name, title of the book, the protagonist, the questions that I'm planning on asking, and website information, things like that to make the show flow. If you've listened to CrimeFiction.fm, you know there's a certain flow to the interviews. It's all basically the same. I ask similar questions to everybody, but I thought it might be interesting just sort of step behind the scenes to see how the whole thing works. So first off, I'm going to fill out this sheet, and you won't hear from me again for a bit. You know, one thing that's kind of cool about Chuck Greaves is that he kind of falls into the world's most interesting man category. He's a former trial attorney who retired at a fairly young age, decided he wanted to write, has written the mystery series, he writes literary fiction, and he runs a vineyard. We'll get into all of that during the interview, but it's some pretty cool stuff. I really like Chuck, and it's always a treat to interview him. Although I kind of feel bad about myself because I've accomplished so little compared to him. A little bit of inside baseball. One of the things that publishers do when they send you books is they send you these little sheets. Can you see that? Let me see. I'll pull this up on my screen. Yep, they send you these little sheets back and forth, telling people that don't read the books about the books. So a lot of, as you know, if you listen to this show, I try and read the books whenever possible, especially if I get them far enough in advance, and I did with this one. So I can tell you that it's a fantastic book, but I love these little cheat sheets because they're great, because I read this a few weeks ago. My memory is not all that great, so it's great to reflect back on as you're putting together the questions for the show. Okay, it is 1:27 in the afternoon. Getting ready to call Chuck Greaves. I'll be calling him at 1:30. So I thought I'd give you a quick overview of what I use here. This is my little MacBook Pro over here. This is a Blue Yeti microphone that I use, and I'll be using Skype to make the telephone call, and I think it's called Ecamm Call Recorder to record these. So one of the cool things about Skype is the best way to make a call that you're going to be recording is to have a Skype to Skype connection. The sound quality is a lot better. But Chuck lives out in the middle of nowhere, so his internet service is through a satellite provider. So it's just not that great. Once again, we're going to be talking about Chuck's book today. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure how he refers to it. That's going to be something that I'll ask him prior to the interview. Does he call it Tom and Lucky, which is the way it's listed at Amazon, or is it Tom and Lucky and George and Cokie Flo? So we'll find that out. There's typically a little bit of pre-interview chat. Unfortunately, you won't be able to hear Chuck because I've got my headphones plugged into the microphone. That allows me to hear everything that's being recorded. But we're going to zip through all of the interview stuff anyway. So there's typically a few minutes of pre-interview chat. Sometimes interview guests are a little nervous, and that early chat gets them over the nervousness. Chuck is not going to be one of those people that's nervous, so we'll probably just catch up. And I'll give him an overview of the flow of the show. Then we'll get right into the show. And at the end, I'll be back. So I'm just getting ready to call Chuck now. I'm going to put my headphones on and call him. And do you hear the cat in the background? I don't know whether you can hear that or not. She is my little podcast assistant. Hold her up. She's kind of cranky, but here she is. She is, 15? Can you see her? Yep, 15. She loves us. She doesn't really like anyone else, so I think she knows that you're here, and that's why she's a little bit cranky. So you need to be quiet during the interview. All right, phone call time. I'll be back. On Facebook. So, again, always a pleasure to chat with you, Chuck. Thanks. You too. Bye. And that's it. That was the interview with C. Joseph, a.k.a. Chuck Greaves. We talked about the book. We talked about the research. He actually had access to all of the files of the trial from Lucky Luciano back in the day. So, a fun interview. And we talked about Chuck's Vineyard, some of the other books that he's written, and he's also writing a screenplay now. So that's it for the interview portion. I'm going to cut this off, and I'll start the video again when I start producing the show. All right, we are on to the production phase now. And I'm going to actually show you the screen for this so that you can actually see what's going on. It'll be really fast. It's not going to be in real time because this is probably going to take 30 minutes or so. Normally it takes about 2 minutes of editing for each minute of audio, and I think I've got 16 or 17 minutes of audio. It is 3:14 right now. So what I'm going to do is take the track that I recorded yesterday with Ecamm Call Recorder, split it using an app that Ecamm gives us. If you're a Mac user, you can use Ecamm Call Recorder. If you're a PC user, there's a program called Pamela that does all the same things. It records from Skype and gives you these little applications that'll split, things like that. Then I'm going to add both tracks to GarageBand. I do all my editing in GarageBand, apply my settings for the two different tracks, and then edit. When the editing is done, I export it as I think it's an ACF file. I'm not sure. The file is enormous that comes out of there. And then I use a program called Levelator to level the sound because sometimes I'm talking louder than my guest or vice versa, so this levels the sound out. Then I drop the finished product into my show format, which has the music at the beginning, music at the end, export that as an MP3, and then move it into iTunes for tagging, and then I upload it to, I use Amazon S3 to store these files, and they're all played from there, so when you download an episode, it's coming from Amazon S3. So I will do all of that on the screen. It'll be very fast, and then when we're done, I'll be back again. And we're off. So first I'm going to split the audio into two, and you'll see them popping up here, 1 and 2. There's 1, there's 2. I'll open GarageBand. A new project, podcast. And then I drag the tracks in. Side 1 is me, or my voice. Side 2 will be Chuck's voice. And away we go. Looks like right now we've got 21 minutes, but there's some conversation in the beginning.
Good. Thanks for taking the time to do this.
Hey, I'm happy to do it. Little bit of a heads up. I am actually recording this. I'm recording myself doing this show. I've had some interest in how I put these shows together, so I'm recording myself doing the entire process with your show. But this is Chuck's voice here. It's very low. He was as I mentioned earlier, he was talking on a telephone. This is my voice up here. It's quite a bit higher. So that's why I use the levelator program to level things out. I've also dramatically increased the volume on the second voice here, which says female voice, but I've got it set up as a male voice. And so in an effort to try and manually level them out, it'll get it closer, and then levelator will take care of the rest. Okay, that took 32 minutes. I am exporting now, so I will export and then run the file against levelator. That'll give me the finished file that I can drop into the show template. This is the levelator program I was talking about earlier. It only works for the Mac, so if you're a PC person, there are other options. But levelator, if you're a Mac, works terrifically. Okay, so that's done. Next step is to drag it into, I've got my template here. You can see the last interview I processed was for Melissa Yee, who's got a fantastic series. This interview is going to go live on December 2nd, so I'm going to delete that and drag in C. Joseph Greaves here. It's actually at the 6-second point that the music goes away, or the music begins to fade, and my voice comes on. I go to the end. The last interview was a little shorter, so I'm going to drag the end music to the end. And that should do it. I'm going to test it really quick. Welcome back to CrimeFiction.fm, where we bring the authors of today's best books directly to you. Okay, so now that's being converted to an MP3 file. Then I will drag it into iTunes. Okay, now I'm opening iTunes. Then I'll go to, I'm in my playlist, and this is kind of interesting. I've got 124 different episodes of either the Taylor Stevens Show or CrimeFiction.fm in this particular playlist. So, been a lot of shows for this show, for CrimeFiction.fm. So I drag this in, C. Joseph Greaves, there it is. And it's just right-click and get info. And so here is the default information. I go over to options and change it from music to a podcast, then back to details. The title of the file is going to remain as C. Joseph Greaves. The author is me. The podcast is CrimeFiction.fm. The date I don't use. The composer is me. The genre is podcast. Podcast. There we go. Year, it fills in the year, the time. Then I go get the artwork, which I've got in a folder. Right here. And for iTunes, you use a 300 by 300 size JPEG. Select that. Pops it right in. Description, I don't use any. It picks up the show notes out of the blog post that I do for the show. Options, we've already set that. It's podcast. I always check the sorting to be sure that I have everything right. It's C. Joseph Greaves, CrimeFiction.fm. Because I have 3 different shows, I sometimes get that wrong. Click OK. And then I play a little bit of it to be sure I've got it right.
Okay, as was the case with...
Then I use a program called FileZoomer to upload the file into my Amazon S3 account. It goes into the CrimeFiction.fm bucket. I just didn't work. Drag it in. Files uploading. And there it is, right there. So I click the share button, create a public read access URL, put it in the clipboard, and then I just copy and paste that into the blog post using a program called Blueberry that makes podcasting easier within WordPress. So typically, I would spend 10, 15 minutes then to do the show notes. I've got most of that done. All I need to do is enter in these scribbly notes that I take. My handwriting is terrible, but I can read it. So I'll enter those in, enter that file in, and it's ready to go. So I will be back in a second and show you the finished draft of this. Okay, so it is pretty much done. I'm saving the draft, and then I'll preview it. And when I preview it, I'll play a little clip to be sure that I used the correct file. This is what you'll see when the time comes for this show to go live.
About 15 years ago, I went back to New York. That was
Yet it was wild. That's the right file. So we are done. And I'm going to assume that I have headphone hair right now, because that's what happens when you wear the headphones for that long. So that's the process that I go through a couple times a week for each CrimeFiction.fm interview. Prep for the interview takes 10 or 15 minutes. The interview itself generally takes around a half an hour. Processing the interview, producing the interview takes about another 30 minutes. And then typically writing the show notes, 20, let's say 20 minutes. So add it all up, and that's what the time commitment for each episode of CrimeFiction.fm. I hope you found this interesting. If so, leave a comment in the comment section.